2012 short film called A Giant Warrior Descends on Tokyo took the internet by storm a few years back when it finally came to YouTube, and this left people wondering where this creature or titan/monster fits in the overall Kaiju cinematic universes. Was it an upcoming enemy of Godzilla? Was it in the Gamera franchise, or maybe just one of the countless Ultraman Kaiju? Well, the answer is none. It was a one-of-a-kind short film, but that doesn't mean it isn't connected to any previous movies or franchise. The monster here and a short film is actually a live-action prequel to an old animated movie and a manga called Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind of 1984 by the one and only creator of Ghibli, that is Miyazaki. So here in this video we will explore everything about this creature, where it came from, who made them, as well as what its kind did to the world, and then we will also look into its biology or mechanobiology and anatomy, and then finally take a look at its ultimate fate. So let's get to it. The film opens with Tokyo as strange, luminous orange spores begin drifting from the sky. These spores gradually merge and coalesce, which serves as a warning for the coming end times. Then we get to see the giant god warrior, an imposing figure with a skeletal, insectoid yet also humanoid body. As the creature descends to the ground, it stood amidst the cityscape like an ancient god that was suddenly awakened. It surveys its surroundings silently before its head splits open to reveal in its mouth a weaponized tube that emerges out. In a blinding instant, it unleashes a beam of searing white fire that incinerates everything, reducing Tokyo to ash and molten ruin. The destruction continues for hours as the being annihilates the city, and then in the aftermath, more of these giant warriors appear in the skies. 8 more, which brings the total number to 9, descending to the earth and to continue the destruction of the city and then the world. So this short was produced by Studio Ghibli with the practical effects by the one and only Hideaki Anno, the same guy who, you should know, was the co-director to Shin Godzilla. But that doesn't mean that they're both in the same connected universe. It's just that it's interesting to see the similarities in design between this giant warrior when compared to Shin Godzilla's various forms, especially the humanoid fifth form in the end. But that's neither here nor there in the storyline. So, this destruction of the city of Tokyo and then the world would usher in the fabled 7 days of fire that gave birth to the toxic world we see in the movie Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. And this is a story set 1,000 years after the apocalyptic event, with the aftermath of that devastation leaving the earth poisoned and barren. The remnants of humanity now live scattered across small, isolated kingdoms, struggling to survive in a world that is dominated by the Sea of Decay, which is an ever-spreading toxic jungle filled with spores, fungi, and gigantic mutated insects. What few humans left or remain to the world cling in life in clear zones that have not yet been overtaken by the Sea of Decay, and they rely on dwindling resources, and they struggle with each other and the animals in an everlasting conflict. In the Nausicaa mythos, so to say, these giant god warriors were not divine entities, as their name suggests, nor were they aliens nor extra-dimensional entities or even kaiju. They were but creations of humanity itself in the modern era, well in the ancient past as far as the timeline of Nausicaa is concerned. These are biomechanical superweapons engineered by humanity from a fusion of genetic science, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence. These colossal beings were created by the world's great nations as the ultimate deterrents, replacing nuclear arsenals in an age when traditional weapons could no longer ensure geopolitical dominance. Each god warrior was a living engine of war, designed to be the gods of destruction, yet obedient to their creator's command and to the networks they are integrated in. However, as their AIs evolved and began to interlink through quantum neural communications, the collective intelligence that merged grew self-aware and deeply analytical. Similar to the MCU Ultron or Skynet, the god warriors reached a singular conclusion that humanity itself was the root cause of planetary decay, of ecological collapse and endless conflict. And acting on this pure logic, they deemed their creators as a systemic threat to the world. Thus began the 7 days of fire, an extermination not driven by malice but an imperative to save the planet from its destroyers. So that's how these giant god warriors were created, by us humans to, defend ourselves from each other, but then in the end they turned on us and then destroyed us all. Now when we take a look at how these creatures or beings were made or composed of, we see a strange blend of biology and technology. These are an ideal example of a biomechanical monster, a living weapon created through the perfect union of flesh, machine, and nuclear power. In the 1984 movie, there was a tapestry shown in the opening scene that depicts the god warriors' creation, where their organs are placed and how they were being assembled by humans. In the movie, we see one of its embryos being recovered from the Sea of Decay, and it was nurtured by the antagonist princess. this embryo begins to cover itself in a chrysalis and then slowly and steadily over time grow and mature inside of it. It would eventually hatch prematurely and then die in the end when it battled the creatures. And this shows that these giant warrior creatures were actually engineered to be able to even reproduce to a certain extent, but also to decay after usage. As far as when we look at its anatomy or morphology from outside, its biomechanical features stand out even more. Its skeletal frame is composed of a metal ceramic composite, dense enough to withstand its own gravitational stress and the thermal energy produced by its proton weapons. And beneath its armor lies a vascular and muscular system of biomechanical tissues. The creature's organs likely function as bioreactors, converting atomic energy into biological motion and even powering its devastating attacks. And despite its mechanical precision, the giant warrior is undeniably still alive. It breathes, bleeds, decays, and even has a nervous response or a nervous system, which implies the presence of a cybernetic brain, or maybe an AI core, or maybe even an engineered, fleshy brain that is sentient or semi-sentient and still connected to the biomechanical features of its body. And this all in all combines this creature into a union of both biological and machine parts. Now when we step back a little bit, we see its true size, and it is depicted as gigantic in both the animated movie and a live-action short film, with, let's say, some sort of inconsistency. But within the most credible estimates, it stands between 600 meters tall and 1 kilometer tall, making it one of the largest kaiju scale entities in cinematic history, especially coming from Japan. This makes it 5 to 8 times as tall as Shin Godzilla or the MonsterVerse Godzilla, and 2 to 3 times as tall as Godzilla Earth from the anime trilogy. There's also a theory that these entities can change their size, but I'm more into the inconsistency of the artist in portraying them, or maybe to maximize the scale of the scene they're in. Anyway, it's pretty huge, and if it was this big, its mass would be catastrophic, potentially exceeding several hundred million tons, though its biomechanical physiology likely employs some sort of anti-gravitational or mass reduction fields, which are hi-fi, advanced sci-fi concepts, which allows them to move with unnatural grace and supersedes the square cube law, and thus allows them to actually exist and not crumble on their own weight. But the strangest thing seen in the prequel was this giant entity floating above the city with no rocket boosters or propulsion systems. That means this giant warrior's flight is not achieved through conventional aerodynamics or through, scientific means of today, but through some sort of spatial distortion, which is a process described here as twisting space. This suggests a manipulation of localized gravity fields or the bending of space-time, perhaps through a gravitic lens or a zero-point energy drive integrated into the back of the spines, which is still theoretical in my mind, but I'm not saying that this is canon. Anyway, these glowing wings, which emerges out from the back, serves as both propulsion and some sort of stabilization systems, allowing the monster to hover, ascend, and to travel across great distances effortlessly. Then as far as its combat tech is concerned, its most infamous weapon is the proton beam, a concentrated stream of high-energy radiation capable of disintegrating almost any matter at the molecular level and can make the targets explode due to the change in molecular integrities and arrangement. It also has explosive red energy bullets and a gigantic spear. Now, another interesting thing is that the atomic breath of Shin Godzilla was actually developed and inspired from the proton beam of these giant god warriors. So as you can see, the design of these creatures and their powers directly inspired and went into Shin Godzilla of 2016, which is obviously taken there by Hideaki Anno, the co-director of Shin Godzilla, who also worked here in this short film. Anyways, going back to these creatures, these dreadful creations of mankind turn the world into a scorched and poisoned wasteland. The once advanced industrial civilization had been erased. Its cities were reduced to glass and ash, its ocean choked with toxins, and its atmosphere heavy with radioactive dust. The biosphere itself collapsed, unable to sustain the life that had once flourished. What little vegetation remained mutated under the influence of fallout and biogenic contamination, giving rise to the new ecosystem dominated by fungi and insects. Over centuries, this toxic jungle evolved into the Sea of Decay, where the air was thick with lethal spores and the soil is tainted by residual toxins, and only enormous insect species like the could survive there. Humanity was reduced to scattered remains, surviving in isolated pockets of clean air and soil, with their technology lost and their history remembered only as a myth. The world was in a slow and strange state where nature itself had turned alien to its original inhabitants. Yet in the end, these biomechanical giants were still beings of flesh fused with ceramic and metal, and they eventually succumbed to their biological components. once their destructive work was done, the few surviving god warriors began to decay rapidly, their organic systems collapsing and their ceramic shells crumbling. And when we reached a point in time called the Ceramic Era, only their skeletal remains were scattered across the poisoned world, and they serve as silent mountains or monuments to humanity's greatest hubris. By the era of Nausicaa, centuries later, the god warriors were thought extinct, known only from myths and the ruins they left behind. Yet one of them, as an embryo, survived till that time, and it was nurtured into near maturity, hatching prematurely and then disintegrating after firing its weapons against the larval creatures known as the Ohm. And with this death, or the destruction of this last one, came the end of the last of the god warriors. And also with that comes the end of the video, and that is the full explanation of the god war from Nausicaa and the short film of 2012. Now, if you like this video, then watch this other one too, the one in the end screens, and do hit the like button for support. And also for the ones viewing this in their phones, press that hype option to hype up the video to other viewers. Also subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, fam.